What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with my certified fantabulous co-host, Mr. Grant Hughes. We are beginning the offseason grade trek, starting with, I think, the Southeast Division. We did not clear this before we really ran into the podcast. This is terrible prep, even though we both put in a bunch of prep for it. Before we get started, the usual reminder, please remember to subscribe if you've not already. Hit that sub button on YouTube. Like and comment on every video to help the algorithm love us back. Leave reviews and ratings on Apple and Spotify. That helps us move up the charts. And if you've done both those things, tell people about us. Shout us out on social media. Share an episode, whether it's a YouTube link or the podcast link, to people who you know like hoops. Follow us on all the socials at HardwoodKnocks on TikTok and Twitter, at Hardwood_Knocks on Instagram. Join our Discord. The link to that is in the podcast and YouTube description. And if you would like to support the show, check out our merch. The link to that store is in the podcast and YouTube description as well. Grant, how the heck are you doing?
So good, Dan. I'm happy to, as usual, like I sort of forgot everything that happened in the draft and free agency because it was so long ago. So this is always helpful for me. And to get to talk to you and doing it is just a nice added bonus.
Are you ready to carry the multiple podcasts that we're recording today as I run on fumes, congested fumes?
Yeah.
I feel like I'm adding a D to everything I say, like internally. I just feel a D being added to everything I say.
Well, speaking of, should we start with the Atlanta Hawks in the Southeast Division?
Yes, I wanted to go over the criteria that we used really quickly.
Did you have criteria? I don't know if that's criteria.
I just threw random grades on there. C, I think people get mad. C is considered a passing average grade. And I don't know how many C's we're ultimately going to dole out collectively. Don't get mad if your team got a C. And I think I graded it relative to what I thought within reason they could have done, where it's okay if you don't like that the Houston Rockets, who are not going to appear in this podcast, signed Fred VanVleet. What is the move that they missed out on by doing that? And then the other thing I struggled with, and we mentioned this at the top, is how do you handle teams that did fundamental things and made these organizational decisions that we don't necessarily agree with, where the Bulls, who will not be on this podcast either, everything they did in a vacuum was kind of solid, but you thought that they should have torn it down. Like, do you ding them? Did you ding them in your grade for that?
I think for me, like part of what makes this tricky is that ultimately it kind of comes down to how closely did what the team actually, how closely did the team's decisions align with like what I would have done if I were in charge, which is that presupposes that I have any idea what I'm doing and know how to run an NBA team, which is not the case. But like, that's kind of the starting point, right? Because you're just grading it against that price is in all the, well, what could they have done? How much should they have paid this guy? Should they have paid this guy at all? That's just, you're basing it on like the overall NBA market and like what other players went for and things like that. But it ultimately is just kind of like, would I have done this? Or, how much does this deviate from what I would have done were I in the position of the, head decision maker? So like, that's the big grain of salt here, I think, for the grades. But yeah, it really, it does for me. It encompasses like, what were the team's opportunities? What's the team trying to do, as nearly as we can discern that? And then in terms of like, are they trying to get better? Are they tearing it down? Are they trying to make, a run from a play-in team to the 6th seed or whatever? Are they contending? Like, and then you try to minimize like how much you think their direction is like good or bad or right or wrong. And then kind of frame the decisions and grade based on like, well, if that was the goal, how well did they, sort of pursue it? That's kind of, I mean, that's long-winded, but that's sort of how I went about it. But like you, a C is not a bad grade. A C is like, this is, not the meme, but like, this is fine. You did well.
Nothing's on fire, most likely.
Yeah, nothing's on fire if you got a C. Anything below that, like you might have some issues. But yeah, I think we approached it pretty similarly.
And unlike last year, we're not going to list off every transaction. We're going to try and talk about the big bullet points. If we think the other person forgot something, we will do that. And if you think we forgot something, you're free to get at us on socials. Do you want to start us off with
Sure.
Southeast Atlanta Hawks?
Yeah. So just the basics here, no particular order. Drafted Kobe Buffkin at 15. Traded John Collins finally, mercifully, to the Jazz for Rudy Gay and a future second, which, okay, we'll talk about that some more.
Don't
signed
forget the
Dejounte.
trade exception they're not going to use. Yeah, you mentioned that.
This is why we need you to chime in, because I did not put the trade exception on my summarized version.
It's to be fair, I think it's immaterial because they're not going to use the $23 million traded player.
In some cases, that would be material. That's a big that's
not for this team. Not for the Kings of we're going to pay the tax, but not really.
Right.
We're willing to pay the tax, but not really.
Speaking of paying, signed Dejounte Murray to an extension, 4 years. The range is like, I think I'm looking at it as like 114 million, but it can go a little higher. There's a player option on the last year there. They had the Hawks had a complicated multi-team trade where they got a bunch of guys, Ty Washington, Usman Garuba. Ultimately, they ended up with Patty Mills, basically, is what you need to know from all that. And unless like that's it's Wes Matthews they signed for the minimum. Anything I missed there that you would, label as noteworthy? You kind of directed us towards some of the like broader issues that we should probably discuss about the Hawks. Like, what's the plan? How willing are they to spend? And like, where do they think they are in the East? And did they do enough to, get there?
We know they botched the John Collins situation, and this was all done in service of, for the most part, getting out. Even if you think John Collins' deal is a net negative, which is fair to believe at this point, as much as we have conviction that he is still a good basketball player, this was all done in service of just ducking the tax. And that always rubs me the wrong way. Now, are they good enough to pay the tax? I don't know. I do think they hit a home run with the Dejounte Murray extension. However, because of that extension, you're now sort of rolling these same problems into next offseason where it's, all right, with Trae and Murray making a little bit more, and we have Bogdanovich on the books, and we have Clint Capella, and there's going to be DeAndre Hunter too, and what's going to happen with some of these guys who are extension eligible that will be thinking about their next deals. This feels like a team that's going to be straddling the luxury tax line, trying to play that game a little too long. And it feels like I look at this roster and believe, so all they've kind of done is kick the can, and next summer we'll be talking about, oh, did they dump Clint Capella? Because like they have Onyeka Okongwu coming up. That all aside, I'm not the whole John. They botched the John Collins situation. If you want to look at the TPE as like this massive win for them if they want to make an acquisition at the beginning of next summer, maybe not. It probably won't be this season. Sure. I don't think that they are any better than they were at the start of this offseason. You really have to believe that Kobe Buffkin's going to come in and be great. And I do like his ability as a finisher at the rim. Where does he fit in to this guard rotation? Just so you have Trae Young and Dejounte Murray and Bogdanovich. So I was thoroughly unimpressed with their offseason. I don't know what moves they left on the table, but for them to identify that their biggest goal was to not get better, but to upkeep their books, if I'm a fan, is just really disappointing because they didn't even chase upgrades. And the final thing I'll say is the maybe saving grace is they've been linked to Pascal Siakam. Mm-hmm. And so it seems like they're willing to give up AJ Griffin, and DeAndre Hunter and stuff to get Siakam. Maybe that would change the context of the grade, although it would be, they would be sacrificing a lot of floor spacing there for a team that has to work on its outside shot profile already.
How much? So the John Collins thing is interesting to me because, that was his market value turned out to be at the time they decided to trade him or the time they decided, they were able to or had to, not very good. Like Rudy Gay in a second. That's not great. How much do you hold the fact that like Collins was even on the team long enough for his value to decline to that point against the Hawks for this offseason? Because you know what I mean? Like there was a time where probably they could have traded him for a first or more than that, and they didn't. And this will come up in a lot of other teams too. It's, did the move they made with Collins this past month, like that's not a good move, but it looks way worse because of what theoretically they could have traded him for. I just don't know how to kind of weigh that. So I wonder how you think about it.
I think because we're talking, at least to some extent, about a previous front office regime that decided to marginalize him with some of the talent that was coming in. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much you hold it against them, but this front office definitely had a strong voice during the middle of the season. And so to not move John Collins at the trade deadline and then settle for this, where it was a salary dump, like it was just a straight salary dump for them. I feel like that's a pretty big whiff on there. And they didn't have as much time, but they had the same information that Travis Schlenk was working with for all these years. And the Hawks kept putting people on top of him in the offensive pecking order, and it just never made sense.
Yeah. You want to get to the grade for this team?
Where'd you end up with them?
So the Hawks were 500 last year. They did not get better. You said this. So it's a D plus. And I think it could be lower if not for the Murray extension, which, it's not an insignificant amount of money, but I think it's less than, I didn't think a Murray extension was realistic. And we've talked about this a little bit. So to get it done and get it done at a number that, is at least reasonable and might actually be like a objectively good deal, like value wise, that bumps them up from what could have been a D or, a D minus even, I think, to me.
Yeah, I went with a D plus as well. I wanted to go lower, but I think the Buffkin pick was reasonable because I like him. I just don't know his path to succeeding in Atlanta, which sort of muddied it for me. But I really, the Dejounte Murray extension, like you said, I did not expect that to happen. I just assumed he was going to hit the open market.
Yeah.
Which would bring us to the the Charlotte Hornets staying in the division. The big notes for them: drafted Brandon Miller at number 2, drafted Nick Smith Jr. at number 27. Miles Bridges signed his qualifying offer. He'll now be a unrestricted free agent next summer, and he has an implicit no trade clause. His bird rights will not transfer if they decide to trade him. They did trade number 34 and number 39 for number 31, James Nagy, and they signed LaMelo, despite the reporting on this. It's a 5-year, $205.9 million extension. There are no player options, and there is language that can bring the total value to 35% of the cap, but it is not worth 35% of the cap right off the bat, as was initially reported. The other notes on them is sort of what's yet to be done. Kelly Oubre Jr. remains unsigned, and then PJ Washington, RFA, he remains unsigned. And then insofar as this matters, I don't think it can, but it's a note. Michael Jordan sold the team to Gabe Plotkin and Rick Stahl for about $3 billion. So he is no longer the majority owner of the Charlotte Hornets. Any sort of prevailing themes for you coming off of their offseason?
I don't know about prevailing. I mean, it's kind of disappointing, I guess, is the word that comes to mind. I think the sale of the team is ownership is such a big deal. And what we know from the last, several years is that Michael Jordan as an owner has not presided over a team that has won a lot of games or made a lot of decisions that people around the league would say, oh, they really got, like, look what they did there. There's not a lot of praise, I don't think, for sort of any managerial aspect of the Hornets for as long as he's been in charge. So I think that's a real positive potentially, even though you don't have any idea about the willingness of the new ownership, Rick Schnall and Gabe Plotkin, I forget if you mentioned them, to spend, or like who they're going to bring in to make decisions. That's all kind of up in the air. But when you know that the status quo is as bad as it is, like almost any change feels like an upgrade just by default. So that's about the only, and I think just tracking back up through some of the real big points, I'm okay with the LaMelo extension. I just don't know what else they were going to do there. It seemed like that was just going to be the going rate. And he's been an all-star. He hasn't had much around him, supporting talent wise. So it's hard to be sure this is a great deal. And I think the other problem is he will probably continue to not have a lot around him in terms of supporting talent. So you might get 1 or 2 years into this and still really not be sure that was worth it, but you're kind of stuck with that. So no problem there. Drafting, this is super risky and stupid because rookies in the draft is, who knows what's going to happen. We won't get answers forever. But I think drafting Brandon Miller at 2 is a massive mistake. I think Scoot Henderson was the pick there. I don't care if LaMelo is on the team and you've committed to him with this level of years and dollars. So I won't get to the grade yet, but I'm disappointed in like the main move, which was the draft. Disappointed that this team does not project to be like much. I guess they'll be better because Bridges will be back and LaMelo maybe will be healthy, but like not in a meaningful way. Right. So this kind of left me pretty empty. Their off season. The Miller thing again is just that's just there's people. The knock on him is there's not superstar upside, and I think Scoot Henderson just like he's got superstar upside like falling out of his pockets. Like it's everywhere.
I think that's the biggest thing to dig them for at this point. I think the LaMelo extension's fine. It's probably a win for the team that they didn't get a player option in that, or that LaMelo didn't get a player option, and you're going to be happy to pay him the full boat if he qualifies for the 35% max, because that means he's everything that you need him to be. I also, the Miles Bridges stuff, he has 10 games left to serve on his suspension for pleading no contest to felony domestic violence charges. I don't know what, from just the strictly basketball perspective, as callous as that sounds to make that transition, I don't actually know what else they were supposed to do with him. How do you pay him real money after he wasn't with your team in the previous year? And so I don't know that I actually could fault them for not having Miles Bridges on a long-term deal. And now they're he's going to be a UFA and they can't really get value for him on the trade market. So I didn't factor that in too much. And even the PJ Washington delay, I don't know what necessarily the weight is. What's the number being tossed around? There's a level of incompleteness to their offseason. But I think that the meat and potatoes of their offseason was making the decision to choose Brandon Miller over Scoot Henderson, who might be a better fit. But when you're at that position in the draft, when you're at this position in your development, you don't go with the better depth chart fit. You go with the player who has higher upside, and that's Scoot. And so I was pretty harsh on them. I gave them a D for my grade because I'm that big of a believer that Scoot Henderson is going to be this generational point guard. Like if you told me right now I could have John Morant or Scoot Henderson, like I'm going to go with Scoot Henderson. That's how much I'm of a believer. And so there's very much eye of the beholder stuff going on here. And I want to make it clear, the free agency process, any trades, I don't think they missed out on anything. I don't think they whiffed on anything in the free agency market yet. But the fact that the PJ Washington stuff is still floating around out there and they're either playing hardball or what are they waiting for here? Are they exploring sign and trade scenarios that we haven't heard about? It's a D because they're so unfinished. And I think the big thing here for me is that grade alone is basically you should have went with Scoot.
Yeah, I don't have a lot different to say other than I originally had it as a D minus. And then when you said D and I switched it to a D as I was thinking about the ownership thing, which is a positive. And then I went back to a D minus because you said D just to be different from you. So we're very much in the same range there. So D minus for me. I would just echo.
I will say this will be, and we'll eventually do it'll probably be later since I'm going to try and take some time off in a little bit. It'll be fascinating to go back and look at how this team does in our regrades next offseason.
I mean, it's that's the thing. That's the risk, right? Is like maybe Brandon Miller is just really good right away and Scoot struggles a little bit. Like this is the thing. This is probably we've only done 2, but for quite a while, this is going to be the grade that I'm going to feel like least comfortable about because it's based on like such an unknown, which is the quality of a rookie drafted one spot after another. It's just like, we're not going to, it's risky. All right. Miami Heat. That's our next team in this division. The basics here: drafted Jaime Jaquez Jr. at number 18, traded Victor Oladipo to the Thunder for a couple of future seconds, salary dump essentially. Lost Max Strus to the Cavs, structured as a sign and trade for a future second. Lost Gabe Vincent to the Lakers for 3 for 33 basically, or 3 for 32. So lost 2 starters there. Kevin Love is back 2 years, just under $8 million with a player option. Got Josh Richardson for the minimum, and Thomas Bryant for the minimum, notably. And then we just don't know what's going to happen with the Damian Lillard stuff. So this we've said a little bit of incompleteness for the Hornets, but like this entire thing is incomplete for the Heat right now, because if they get Dame, then everything changes. But that's where they are now. Did I miss anything there, or anything that you want to hit on as like just jump right into what you think the big issues are for this offseason?
You mentioned Gabe Vincent left for 3 years and 33, right? I didn't hear that one. So
yeah,
I mean, it's a level of incomplete, but as of right now, so yes, there's an incomplete, a TBD. Let's see how the Damian Lillard stuff goes here. And I don't want to spoil the plot too much, but how do you give this team anything more than a D minus right now? Like I like Jaime Jaquez a lot, but they cut costs by looking at what they did with, and that's fine. Oladipo's probably not going to play. The way that package was structured, though, by the way, is just like, oh, they gave up 29 and 30 second round picks. It's like, are you paying an advance fee on adjusting the protections on that first round pick that's owed to OKC when the Damian Lillard trade goes through? Just because the value that OKC got for Davis Bertans taking on his money is like, I think it's worse than the value they got for taking on not like the one guaranteed year of Victor Oladipo to get those distant seconds. And so you lost 2 players who were monster parts of your playoff rotation. You can say that Duncan Robinson's offensive renaissance during the postseason helps you offset Max Strus's departure. you're not a team that was like an exceptional floor spacing team to begin with, even though your shooting did kind of tick up towards the end of the year. And Max Strus is a better defender than Duncan Robinson. And so you've put strain on that part of your rotation. Now you've also put strain on probably your offense and then your defense by like, okay, Gabe Vincent is gone and there's Kyle Lowry's there. He's getting older. Tyler Hero's going to be healthy. You haven't alleviated, I would say, the burden on Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo at all defensively, let alone when we're looking at offensive creation. That's still the fact that they have Tyler Hero, that doesn't bug me as much. And I think Kyle Lowry kind of didn't turn it on, but like he wasn't this train wreck for all of last season. The Josh Richardson deal, that was actually probably my favorite part of their offseason. I can't believe they got him for the minimum. I look at this team. They were a play-in team to begin with. They had to strike lightning in a bottle, and good for them. We joke about it, but they are #built different when you get to the postseason. That's all great. You still need to eat innings in the regular season, and you weren't good enough to win the title this year. That was very much clear when you went up against the Nuggets. Again, it's an incomplete, but you've bet a lot on the idea that this player who is not yours yet is going to be yours soon. And the money that they let these guys leave for was money they could have paid, and it was eminently reasonable from a team perspective. And again, I wanted to give them an F just because you just made the finals, and now there's like this huge pullback. But I actually like Jaime Jaquez, and I really think, I don't know how much you can wait to see, but like Josh Richardson at the minimum is one of the best signings of the summer.
Yeah, I think that's all fair. I did give him an F, but it's F/incomplete just because if Damian Lillard is on this roster and it doesn't cost you anybody that you really project to be a huge rotation piece other than, I guess, Tyler Hero. Actually, I mean, I don't know how high. I don't know. How about this as a thought exercise? Say they get Damian Lillard for the rumored package, which is they get a bunch of picks together, they move Hero for another pick, and then that's the package. You give up Jovic, you give up who else is going? I can't even remember what the parameters are. Like if they get Damian Lillard in a pack, for what is the basic idea of what we think that trade will eventually look like, where are we? Are we at a B? Are we at an A? Because the team is, I mean, so theoretically you add Lillard, you've lost Vincent, Strus, and Hero probably, right? I mean, almost definitely those, you're not getting the other two back, and Hero seems to have to go to a third team to get this done. You're definitely better on the top end, but man, like Josh Richardson, agree, great signing. Suddenly Josh Richardson is like really important for this team, right? Like I don't know if he starts, but he's going to play. He's in their top 8 for sure. And I don't know. That's tough. What I'm saying is if you get Dame, I'm not sure you get an A for the offseason still,
because like you could have, I mean, in theory, there was nothing stopping you from keeping these guys and then turning around and trading for Dame. This was a cost-cutting maneuver. That's why they, for the most part, I would imagine, let those guys go. That's why you paid to get rid of Victor Oladipo, is that you wanted the flexibility. What do we have them at relative to the tax next season? I should look at that. But like that was just a severe cost-cutting maneuver by their part. And maybe it all works out because you have Dame, but what are they? $7 million into the tax, I think it looks like, or am I looking at the wrong season?
I got them $34 million over the cap. Team salary of 170 with the tax line at 165.2. So yeah, they're $5 million plus into the tax based on what I'm looking at.
So they didn't want to pay a high tax bill for this team, which is that's their prerogative. That's a fair question. I didn't even think of that. Is what happens if and when they do pull off the Damian Lillard trade? Maybe a lot of it goes into, are you not giving up as many picks or swaps as we're talking about, or are you keeping Jaime Jaquez perhaps? But yeah, I would say, based on the package that we think it would take to get them, I think you could elevate them to like a B plus, maybe. You can't just give them a flat A for that, though.
No, I don't think they can get there.
Do we want to move on to the Orlando Magic?
Yes.
Cliff notes on them. They drafted Anthony Black at number 6. They drafted Jett Howard at number 11. They traded number 36, Andre Jackson Jr. to Milwaukee for cash and a 2030 second rounder. They signed Joe Ingles to a 2-year, $22 million contract. That'll be a team option on year 2. And they re-signed Mo Wagner to a fully guaranteed 2-year, $16 million contract. They also did, insofar as anybody cares, they waived Bol Bol. So it's a gut punch to everyone except Phoenix Suns fans. What are you thinking coming out of their offseason, Grant?
Again, like we've just been killing these teams, but I don't love Anthony Black at 6. I don't love Jett Howard at 11. I think this is a harder one for me though, because the counter, I'm not giving this team a good grade. I'll just say that. The counter is like, what should they have done, or like what opportunities were there that they didn't pursue? And that's a harder question to answer. So I'll concede that this is a little, I don't know, maybe I'm asking too much, but this was a team that had, to me, and we've harped on this forever, like pretty clear needs. You need shooting from some of your guards. Anthony Black does not do that. Jett Howard, I think, can, but I mean, again, like, he was the number 11 pick. How much is he going to play? Almost certainly he's going to be like a net negative contributor to winning. And this is a team, the Magic, I think, that we both believe, just based on the talent that's already in place, should definitely be like in the playoff mix. I think we both expect them to get better. Tell me if you disagree. So I was uninspired by almost everything they did. You can talk yourself into Ingles being someone that makes sense as like a pick and roll operator that will make open threes. I'm not sure, that's just not the same thing as finding, like, where were they on Van Vliet? Maybe they just weren't going to get there with the salary.
But mentions they don't need a point guard, even though they drafted one.
Yeah, sure. They need is someone like 6'5" or under that can make an open shot. That would be my advice. So I'll just say this is another D for me. I just don't think a team that had every reason to try to get better in very obvious areas. I just don't think you can reward them for not doing that. So if Black, streamlines his shot, and he's obviously super talented at like basically everything else, but if he comes along more quickly than I expect, or if Howard is just like a knockdown guy, then maybe that changes. But as of now, the Magic just, to me, did not get meaningfully better. And I think, they were one of the teams that had the opportunity to do that, because there was, time there where they had cap space, and there were not a lot of teams with that, and they had pretty clear needs, and they didn't use that space to fill them.
Maybe I've gone soft. I went with a C here. I actually really like Anthony Black. I hate his fit in Orlando, but as I talked about with Charlotte in an attempt to be semi-consistent, are the Magic at the point where they should be drafting for fit at that point? I mean, who was the pick? I actually really like Taylor Hendricks, maybe even more than Anthony Black. But you already have all these other forwards. Would I have gone with Taylor Hendricks if I'm them? I would have considered it. But I think Black has the higher upside as someone who profiles as this ball handler. And look, shooting, you can get it later, and you can surround him with shooting. And you do have Markelle Fultz going into the final year of his deal. You don't really know what the future is going to hold. Cole Anthony, I think he's extension eligible this summer. So I'm open to the idea that maybe it works. And you don't have a lot of wing-sized players on this team, like true wing-sized players. Anthony Black is one. You could mix and match some of those positions and what he's going to bring for you defensively to a team that was basically, they were like 11th in points allowed per possession for most of last season when you filter out garbage time. That's a big deal. I don't know how much better the offense gets with Jett Howard right away. I will say I would have went with Grady Dick.
I was just going to ask you that. Like, why not Grady Dick there when your shooting needs are so pronounced?
I considered going C-D because I actually thought, get the shooter that has some size there. I even thought about, is this a team? And I don't know if I'm kind of letting what we saw from Summer League color this from me. Is this a team that should have, if they wanted to go the guard route, like Cason Wallace would have made a lot of sense here, but he didn't have a great Summer League performance. And if you wanted someone with more size, I don't know what they missed out on. So it's based purely off the draft. They did nothing, I don't think, to move their needle substantially, at least in the immediate term. Long term, I'm open to this idea that, wow, Anthony Black could be really good. They'll surround him, Franz, and Paolo Banchero with a bunch of shooting. Or is it even a matter of those three players, Wendell Carter Jr., who's probably about a plus shooter at his position, throw one more shooter on the court with them? That lineup is just going to hum. It's not going to be Fultz. It's probably not going to be Gary Harris in that instance. So maybe it's Jalen Suggs who develops as a shooter. They did not inspire me this offseason, but I don't think they missed out on anything. And I like the idea of, look, Joe Ingles won't leave space the floor. He's probably overrated as a pick and roll player at this point. He will turn the ball over a lot in those situations, but it's a 1-year deal. And even though I saw some people were just like, nepotism, Mo Wagner got $16 million guaranteed. He was really useful for them for a lot of last season. I think that's a tick overpaid, but if you want this team to eventually make the swing, you need some of these salaries that you can stack together. And if you want to look at it through that vein, nothing they did inspired me. And I'm so curious to see how Anthony Black fits in right off the bat. I just don't think they did anything damning. If there was a move where it was, Fred VanVleet would have gone to the Magic for X, this is not the team that I would have said, give Fred VanVleet the 2-year max, because they didn't have that cap space available. They would have had to create it. And so no one within the numbers that they had of consequence seems like they were going to go there.
Yeah, that's fair. You're making me want to move this up. I'm gonna move it up to a D plus. You've sold me.
So you're at a D plus.
D
So
plus.
marking these down. We're trying to hold ourselves accountable.
Yeah.
This time next year.
All right. As a favor to you, since you're sick, I'll do the Washington Wizards summary here because there's a lot going on. If we're ready to move on here.
Yes, it's also your turn. To be fair,
oh well,
I appreciate it.
I said, Dan, as a favor to you, we're gonna leave it as that. Not that I forgot already what order we're going in. Okay, busy offseason for the Wizards. I guess you'd start with they fired Tommy Shepard, and they changed top decision makers. It's always tricky to gauge. This is a little easier for me than judging like what an ownership change means, but it's still kind of like what does this really suggest? Although the Wizards definitely started acting very differently once they had a new person making decisions. Michael Winger is that man. So Bradley Beal gone to the Suns for 4 first-round swaps, 6 seconds, Chris Paul, Landry Shamet, and some cash. Paul then flipped to the Warriors for Jordan Poole, Patrick Baldwin Jr., Ryan Rollins, and a joke of a 2030 first-round pick that has top 20 protections.
Is that one of the worst first-round picks to be acquired in I'm trying to remember, what was the last top 20 protected first-round pick that was traded?
I'm terrible at remembering this stuff, but there can't have been many that were less valuable.
I put them in my trade articles all the time. I'm like, let's just top 22 protect this to make it seem like it's a real. I don't remember the last one that was. So if anyone remembers, get at us.
Because this can't roll over because it's so far in the future. So if it doesn't convey, it turns into seconds or just goes away.
Right.
So
even the Hornets had that top 18 protected one at one point, but I think that kept rolling over and the picks were the protections were loosened a little bit. So this is exceedingly worse.
Also a 27 second round pick, which is, I think, probably objectively a more valuable asset somehow than a top 20 protected first rounder from 2030. Also traded Kristaps Porzingis, essentially got back Tyus Jones, Danilo Gallinari, Mike Muscala, and then number 35 pick. Then traded Monte Morris to Detroit for a 2027 second rounder. Love that on Detroit's side. We'll talk about that at some point. Drafted Bilal Coulibaly. Sold number 57 to the Warriors for $2 million. That's a good piece of business. Re-signed Kyle Kuzma to a 4-year deal that I'm calling $90 million, just because it seems like some of the escalators and other incentives can move it higher, but it's at least going to be 90. So very busy offseason for the Wizards. Revamped the entire team, changed directions, much overdue, but finally did it. I love this offseason for them. Did I miss anything? Do you feel differently? Does the Kuzma contract bother you? If that's the only negative thing you could really point to, I think, in my opinion, did we have the negative?
Did we have the Monte Morris trade in there? They did so much I could barely keep track.
Yeah, for a 2027 second to the Pistons.
I thought they sold a little low on him, and I know they have some really nice size traded player exceptions floating around now. They created a 9.41 for Monte Morris. They created a $12.4 million one for Porzingis. They got I think a $5.5 million one or something on the Bradley Beal trade. I just thought Monte Morris, I know Wizards fans didn't really like him, but I thought he would be worth more than just this second round pick. So I thought they sold a little low. The Kuzma deal is fine. It's 4 for 90 with $12 million in incentives. I could bring it up to 102. Is Kyle Kuzma on this team past the February trade deadline?
No, and that's why it's kind of fine for me, because the number's totally tradable. And he's still we talk all the time about asset preservation. This to me is what that is. They can definitely move him. You get a first for Kuzma, at that number, I think pretty easily.
So I loved, even down to swinging on Bilal Coulibaly, whereas, hey, you're in the infancy of your rebuild. Go with he's raw on offense, but he showed some real flashes in summer league. And if he hits, he might be your North Star. He might be. I don't know that you could have said that about Jarris Walker,
right?
Or was Taylor Hendricks was still on the board at that point. So I applaud basically everything they did. And I know some people were taken aback by how little they got for Bradley Beal, sending him to a team that had no first round picks to offer. That's on Tommy Shepard and Ted Leonsis, to be clear, who was bragging about that no trade clause for Bradley Beal. That's what forced their hand to make the decision to go this route. There is real value in there. And I think some of the stuff we could quibble over, did they give up too little for Monte? Did they get too little for Monte Morris? Okay. Even Porzingis, that last front office held on to him for too long. You just weren't I don't know who was going to pay him this summer if he had opted out. It's maybe they could have played hardball a little bit more there. But if you don't view him as part of your program and there weren't better offers out there, but I could say you could wonder, okay, well, why didn't they kind of play a little bit more difficult there? Why was he just given up so readily for such a low price point? I guess you could also say, as someone who is not high on Jordan Poole, would you have been better off just with Chris Paul's expiring contract? Do you want the bite at the apple of Jordan Poole for a fake first-round pick? Although if the Warriors convey that first-round pick, both teams will be happy because it means that the Warriors are still good all the way out there, and the Wizards get this extra first-round pick. So I went with a B+ for what they did just because there were some minor quibbles that I had, but this was I could even be talked into an A-. This was a Caps Lock fantastic season for the Wizards because of what it just says about what they're doing. And that's finally rebuilding, doing something other than angling for, the 7th or 8th or 9th best record in the Eastern Conference. And that's a big deal.
Yeah. So one thing I did neglect to mention, they hired Will Dawkins as general manager. So this is this is like an OKC minded front office, just up and down, which I think is pretty clearly a good thing to be in terms of how you're going to run your team. So this is an A- for me. And that is, I don't have any quibble with your point about like, yeah, that seems like a little bit, light for a return for Monte Morris. There were like moves they could have made sooner, but again, that's not on this offseason. It's just like, well,
yeah, to be clear, that didn't factor into my grade at all. I would have just been like, well, I'll let Monte, I don't care how many guards I have. I'm going to let Monte Morris roll into the season and see if someone else gets desperate.
And I think this will shock nobody. I think it's worth it to take a crack at Poole just because even though that contract might be
over SGA, right?
What's that?
Forever. Over SGA forever, right?
Forever. He'll be better in Washington than he was in Golden State. I'm pretty confident of that. I don't know if that's the same thing as saying he's a winning player all of a sudden, especially like he's going to cook this year. Like he is going to have a lot of time on the ball, and that'll bring to the fore all the good and bad of the whole Jordan Poole experience. So it's an A- for me just because the macro stuff, like, oh my God, finally we're like operating in a rational way. We're mimicking what smart teams have been doing forever. And we're not just, obsessed with mediocrity and really what's been like sub mediocrity and paying through the nose for it. So it's an A- because I think they just got the big stuff right. And like none of the trades they made were perfect. Like, there's room to criticize all of them, but they made the trades. So that does it for me, for them, gets them there. So I got a whole bunch of like D's and terrible grades, and the Wizards come out with an A- for me in this division.
Did you have any issues with the Kuzma contract just because you asked me about it before?
No, I was just curious because it does. I mean, it's the only guy they brought back really. And it wasn't cheap, but I think I'm not the biggest Kuzma fan, but I think that's a totally reasonable number for what he is and what his value as a trade chip would be, which is how I view him, because like, he's very much a which one of these things doesn't belong if you just line up their roster. He's not going to be on this team for very long.
We did the Southeast in under 40 minutes. I don't feel like every division is going to be that efficient for us, but do you want to take us out of here?
Yeah, seems unlikely. As always, thank everybody who listen, who is commenting, who is checking in on Discord, all that stuff. Please remember to rate, review, subscribe wherever you consume this podcast, especially on YouTube. You can comment there too. Buy our merch. I don't know if we mentioned that. Dan's wearing a lovely HardwoodKnocks shirt for those of us who are watching and not just listening. Thermonuclear AF. What else?
Your kids know the meaning of that officially, right? Because I accidentally sent you a thermonuclear.
No, they don't know that. They're unaware. I will do. How about this? If they ever ask, I'll just say, "Here's Dan's number. You can ask him what it means."
That's still going to be your problem after we get off the phones.
That's true. I'm really just punting for
awesomely fantastic. We could spin it as that, right?
Yeah, they'll buy that. Follow us on the socials, buy the merch, tell your friends and enemies. This is the first podcast we've recorded since the one and only Frank Ntilikina, who I'm shouting out right now, found an NBA team.
I put up a mailbag, but he is you know what? That didn't factor into the Hornets grade. We didn't mention it. That's a straight A
plus. Hornets got them. You got a real winner.
Wow, that's terribly off brand that we didn't even mention Frank Ntilikina. I was still trying. Look, I'm sick. I make no apology.
I got no excuse other than Frank Ntilikina takes up way more brain space in your head than mine. But last but certainly not least, apologies to Jared Allen.